Hi all, Rob Cairns here. I'm the CEO and Chief Creator of Amazing Ideas at StunningDigitalMarketing.com. Today I'm going to talk to my good friend Cal Millar. Cal has spent over 30 years working as a journalist in the city of Toronto. He has some really interesting insights into journalism, the city, writing, and more. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the discussion I had with Cal. So I'm here this morning with my good friend Cal Millar. Cal, how are you doing today?
Absolutely wonderful. Thank you, Rob.
Yeah. So you and I have known each other a long time, and you have a little bit of a historied presence in the city of Toronto. Tell me a little bit about yourself.
Well, for more than 30 years, I was a reporter in Toronto, emphasizing the word reporter because I'm not sure the media has a good reputation these days. But I covered what you would call general news and basically recorded the history of the city for the time I was there.
Yeah, and you're I know from sitting down with you over the years and talking on the phone or talking in person, you're quite the knowledgeable historian. How did you get into the newspaper business? I don't know if I've ever asked you that, actually.
Well, it's an interesting story. It began right back in public school, and I had a teacher who told me that she thought I would be a newspaper reporter at some point in my life. And she used the word journalism. I can't remember the grade I was in, but I didn't even know the meaning of the word. And eventually, I just sort of fell into it. But prior to that, when I was in public school, I had still in public school, I had a couple of friends who were interested in putting out a community newspaper. And at the age of 10, we actually did produce a paper for the neighborhood. And that's how it all started. And interestingly, many years later, I'm still in touch with that friend who currently lives in Tucson, Arizona.
That is a really cool story. And I recall, and I'm quoting, you were a day one reporter at the Toronto Sun when it came out of the ashes of the Telegram, were you not?
Yeah, I was at the Telly. It folded actually on our wedding day. And,
wow. Wow.
When I got back from my honeymoon, there was a message waiting for me asking if I would be interested in joining the staff of the soon-to-be formed Toronto Sun. Mm-hmm. So I obviously said yes, and not a lot of options in those days. And obviously additional expenses with being married, so I had to look after things and eagerly accepted. And had a great deal of fun putting out the Toronto Sun in its early days.
Yeah, you worked with the legendary editor David Creighton, did you not? He was the managing editor, was he not, when the Sun came up?
Douglas Creighton. He was the publisher.
Sorry,
from
publisher.
David. Yeah.
And
Peter Worthington, the editor.
Yeah. Two really legendary people in this business in the city, no question.
Exactly. And Doug was one of the people that took me under his wing at the Toronto Telegram. He was the city editor at the time, and I had a really good career through him. So I appreciate the opportunity.
What is the most interesting story you ever covered? Do you have one or two that stand out in all your years?
Yeah, there's one in particular that stands out, and it really went nowhere. Well, I mean, as far as I was concerned, but internationally, it was major. It was a very strange shooting in Toronto, where somebody had fired 3 bullets into a home on Post Road, And simultaneous to the shooting in Toronto, 3 shots were fired into a building which was a secret police facility in Moscow.
Oh, cool.
And the 2 of them were linked, but I didn't realize that initially. And eventually, that led to an attack by Yeltsin on the parliament buildings in Russia when his opposition took over the building. Very, very strange story, but it showed how the Russian secret police had tentacles all over the world. And what happened, the person in Toronto was the second in command of the secret police and had stolen $40 million, which was in transit to finance operations in Australia.
That is really interesting.
The story's like a novel.
Yeah.
And that was really one of the most interesting stories because we were able to basically spend a year following the money. And we had all kinds of characters who had government connections internationally. We found that people were involved with a company called Saveco, which was actually a front for the KGB. And the story just kept spinning and spinning.
You know, it's funny, you're telling the story, and I'm a reader, as you know, and I can always tell an old-time author, an old-time writer, and I don't mean that in a derogatory way, because I'm sitting here with my eyes closed, and I'm actually painting the picture that you're telling me in my head as you're telling me that story. And I could almost picture this playing out, where I think a lot of writers today, they don't paint that picture. That's always been the advantage reading over watching TV in my books, has been you can paint the picture, and the good writers can still do that. And it's actually really satisfying. I can almost see the money coming out of the KGB as you're telling that story, Cal. So.
And I mean, I've just given you a thumbnail version. It has tentacles and just basically it goes all over the map. And we had situations where gold was being taken out of the Kyrgyzstan area by a politician in Toronto. He helped carry the shipment of gold from that country, and it eventually ended up in the United States on a Canadian plane. The president of that country was murdered in the middle of this situation. It's very, very strange story, and it's actually worthy of a book.
Yeah, and we'll get to some books in your writing in a bit. What is the most interesting place you've ever gone? I know in your day, they didn't do what we call a wire story. And for those who don't know, a wire story is when one of the press sends a wire reporter and just reports on it. Now, in your day, you actually traveled around to cover these stories. So what's the most interesting place you ever went?
Oh, there's all sorts of them. I mean, you end up in different parts. I remember going down to Puerto Rico, and there were more than 100 people killed in a fire at the DuPont Hotel, and it was on New Year's Eve, and I didn't have my passport on me. I had my wife meet me at the airport, and she handed me my passport. I jumped on a plane, and I'm in Puerto Rico. Everything's working out fine. I'm coming back to Canada, and when I arrived there, the fellow at customs said, "Do you realize your passport's expired?" My wife had handed me one that was used, that I had already renewed, but she didn't bring the renewal. But I was thinking when you said strangest places, I'm just imagining if the office had sent me from Puerto Rico, say to somewhere in South America, because I would have been the closest person, what would have happened to me trying to use a passport that wasn't valid?
Yeah. Yeah, I get that. I can remember in the day, even traveling to the U.S. as a youth, I went to the States, and this was before 9/11, where we could use a birth certificate, and I forgot mine at home. And I can even remember in the day ticking off the box coming back from the States saying I had proper ID with me, knowing I didn't, thinking, what are they going to do? Throw me out of my own country? Go ahead. you know, the things we do. One of the things that you've done that's really interesting is you've been involved in Crime Stoppers for many, many years. How did you get involved and why originally?
Initially, it was a story. I was assigned, Hamilton had started a Crime Stoppers program,
Okay.
the first city in Ontario. And that's the first time I had ever heard of the word Crime Stoppers, the program. And I went over to Hamilton to talk to the coordinator, a fellow called Jim Willis, and found out that it was a crime-solving initiative that could be utilized in any community.
Mm-hmm.
For the story that I was writing for the Star at that time, I called the police chief, Jack Marks, and said, was this something that Toronto would be interested in? And he said they're looking at it. And of course, that was part of the story, that Toronto was looking at implementing a Crime Stoppers program. I thought no more of writing a story other than I thought that it was a very unique program that involved the community, the police, and the media. The media was a very important component
Mm-hmm.
because they promoted the effort and highlighted unsolved crimes.
Yeah.
Shortly after that, I got a call from the chief asking if I would be involved in a steering committee to implement a program in Toronto, which I did, and from that point on was basically involved in the initiative.
Yeah, and speaking of police, you do have a retired police badge, do you not?
Yeah, when I retired, the police department made me an honorary detective.
Yeah.
Basically for the work that I'd done in Crime Stoppers and the coverage that I had provided the police over the years.
Yeah. It's all about relationships and not I mean, that's quite the achievement. What people don't understand is reporters are like anywhere else, or a marketer or a business person. It's all about the relationships and the trust level that you have with the people that you're telling the story about, right, Kel?
Yeah, I mean, it's the ability to call someone any time, day or night, and your call be welcomed and get an answer and information that you're looking for.
So true. Since you've retired, one of the things you've done well is written several books. Why did you get into book writing? Besides that, reporters never die, and we know retired reporters. I mean, let's look at our mutual friend Ian Robertson. He's retired and he's still traveling the globe. So
still actively writing, and actually he's writing books as well. The reason I actually wrote the first book was because of something I couldn't do really well in the newspaper business, and I understand why. And that was to help find missing people.
Mm-hmm.
And the first book that I wrote was basically unsolved homicides, because I didn't think there would be an interest in missing people.
Mm-hmm.
But after I wrote the book on unsolved homicides, called Find My Killer, I started looking into the number of missing people. And thought it would be helpful for families who were looking for people and having no answers if they were compiled in a book and people could use them and maybe recall something. I had initially wanted to do the book on missing people, but I had difficulty getting a lot of information from police departments, but they were more willing to provide information on unsolved homicides.
Yes.
So I stepped into that one first. What I had difficulty with in the newspapers is when they had a missing individual, the papers were reluctant to carry the story because just the technology involved. You'd write a story during the day, the person may be found in the evening, your paper comes out in the morning,
Yeah.
and the story is incorrect. So they tend not to focus, or they did tend not to focus on missing people.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's become a priority, especially with children,
Yes.
to make sure that the media publicizes those cases.
Yes.
And I think the book has helped change the attitude a little bit.
Yeah, it has. And I mean, a good example is in Canada, we have what's called an Amber Alert system. In the States, they have something similar. And we just had one the other day, which was down by your way in Niagara region. And it actually led to an arrest. So, I mean, the publicize of that is greatly.
Yeah, and the safe recovery. Yeah, and the safe recovery of 5 children that had been abducted by their father. The Amber Alert is supposed to be issued for a missing child who has the abduction has been observed by someone, and they have full description, etc. The one that was put out by Niagara the other day didn't really fit that parameter, but the investigators obviously felt that an Amber Alert would have an impact and effect. And in fact, they were right, because shortly thereafter they got information which led to their safe return.
Yeah, and this morning I pick up the news, and apparently one of the issues we've had in this country or in this province in the last couple months since the Amber Alert system's been working is we have a glutton of people who call and complain because it goes off on your cell phone, off on your cable, it goes off everywhere. And there was actually a 70-year-old man in Hamilton, Ontario, that has been charged with public mischief for calling 911 on this last Amber Alert, saying he was going to tie up emergency lines because he could. And the best advice I have to anybody is if you hear an Amber Alert, just think of where you would be if that was your child before you decide to do or not to do and complain about it.
Yeah, no, exactly. Exactly. And I found that after the missing book was published, it right now it still leads the books that I have in sales. There's a tremendous amount of interest that people have in missing individuals.
Yeah, it's a great book. I know you've written several. My favorite one, as you know, and I actually worked with you and Ian to do some, Robertson, your co-writer, to do some PR, was your book about the story of Russell Williams. That is an interesting story, to say the least, is it not, Cal?
Yeah. No, that was a very difficult story to write because of the nature of the situation. And the material that we had to provide information to us for the book. I mean, the sad part is that Russell Williams had recorded both on video and audio the final moments of his victims.
Yes.
And they were, I mean, you were actually able to go inside a murder This is the first time in my knowledge that that has occurred in Canada. And we had individuals tell us that it might become commonplace with homicides in the future that this be done. Prior to that, the killer who carried out a mass killing in Norway recorded the incident, which is the first known incident of that nature where the murders were captured on video. And since then, of course, you are probably aware, the public's aware, that many killings have now been recorded, and it's a sad trend.
Yeah, and the add to that sad trend is what seems to be the trend lately is they jump on social media, whether it's Facebook or Twitter or some avenue like that, and they post their manifesto before they get into the killing spree and before themselves become deceased, and they post that out there, and that just seems to add to it.
Yeah. I mean, as the recent case where the killer in Toronto took the lives of individuals with a van on a busy street. In his confession to police, he said he wanted to notoriety, and doing something like that, although his case wasn't recorded, but doing something of a mass nature, he thought he would become a public celebrity, and it's very, very sad.
And the other one that falls into the same line is the two young males that killed the people in BC, and they actually documented on the video and basically admitted to the killings before they committed suicide in the suicide pact after. I mean, that was along the same lines where they, and that seems to be the trend even in these big killings in the U.S. lately. There's always a letter or a manifesto or something.
Seeking fame. They're seeking fame.
Yeah. Your last book was on the history of Crime Stoppers. That one was fun to write, wasn't it?
Yeah, that was actually written in collaboration with the person who formed the first Crime Stoppers program in the United States, the person who came up with the concept, Greg McAleese.
Yep.
He was a police officer in Albuquerque, New Mexico. But the interesting part, he was born in Ontario. His parents lived in Picton, and his father was with the Canadian military, the Air Force at the time, and they were transferred to Albuquerque as a liaison individual with the American Air Force. And Greg grew up in Albuquerque. But he has very, very close ties and obviously relatives living in the province. I got to know Greg initially through the stories that I wrote for the Star on Crime Stoppers, and then various times met him. We brought him up to Toronto when we launched the Crime Stoppers program in the city back in 1984, and we through the years have met various times. The book was put together in an interesting fashion because in retirement, Greg has moved to the Philippines, and we used the internet to communicate and produce the book. So some very modern technology for a program that began with pencil and paper.
Yeah, and for a writer that, as in you, that originally started on the typewriter, correct?
I thought I chiseled him in stone, but it's all right.
Yeah, but it's amazing, like the power of technology if it's used properly, and that's kind of.
Well, technology has completely changed the media.
Oh, there's
And anyone with a cell phone can now become a reporter.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I know I go to events around town, and you go to events around town, and where did the pictures show up? On Facebook, on Twitter, on a media page. I mean, we all take pictures. We all have a phone and a
Yeah,
video
I
cam.
don't think,
We all have a phone and a video camera in our pocket now, and we're even
yeah, and we post them. I mean, I'm guilty. I'm guilty.
yeah. So am I, and
Yeah,
I know in Twitter, I use Twitter as a news feed, and I've got a list set up that's got all kinds of reporters in it, and I don't watch conventional news anymore generally on TV. I tend to go to social media and say, okay, what's going on, and how's it going on, and I follow it that way, and it has changed. It used
yeah.
to
Well, I
be.
mean, you even see the mainstream media,
Hmm.
the newspapers, quoting things they've read on Twitter.
Yep. Yep.
I'm a little sad at that because you don't know the truthfulness of it, but in the immediacy, um, sometimes reporters are just forced to use that as a source.
No, I agree. And I think sometimes it's not wanting to dig. And I think that's a problem. I think in
Well,
your
I think that might be that's a sad comment, but it might be true.
yeah, in your time you did the background research on the story and you put it out, where now I think what goes on a
Well,
lot.
we didn't have the luxury of people being on the scene and typing information into almost a wire service.
Hmm.
But it's really not a wire service; it's a gossip page.
Yep, yep, yep. And I mean, one story I attribute a lot to social media. Um, I was going to say 6 years ago, but it might even be seven now. We had the infamous Danzig shooting in Toronto, and I lived in that neighborhood. I live very close to where it happened. And I can tell you, even then, 7 years ago, social media blew up with stories coming out of that very quickly. And,
Yeah,
it,
it was the same with Danforth, the shooting on the Danforth.
mm-hmm.
The initial reports that came out were not from the police radio; they were from Twitter.
Yeah, yeah. And to be fair, in Toronto, I would say the police have, and we have a mutual friend who's in that, have embraced that as well. They've recognized that social media is a big part of their job now, whether they like it or
Yeah,
they hate
I
it.
think Toronto Police is recognized as one of the leaders
Mm-hmm.
in utilizing social media for communication.
Yeah, and it's not just communication in terms of stories or media. It's even any communication. I mean, I don't know about you,
It's
but
informing the public.
yeah, I've got friends and business colleagues all over the world, and a lot of those connections have come that way. So, I don't always look at the negativity of the medium. I actually look at the positivity, and I know in my life it's made a major impact of what I do, how I do business, how I do it. I mean, you and I are a really good example of that. We've met through mutual friends, but a lot of those original friendships for me were social media friendships, and they've grown over the years, and that's what people don't realize, right? So,
Yeah, I think when you're dealing with social media, what you have to do is look carefully at the source,
mhm, I agree.
and if it's not a legitimate source, be cautious.
No, I agree with you. And if it's not a legitimate source, as a friend of mine who's a grade 7 teacher tells her students, go and find another source to corroborate the first one, and at least have for
Exactly.
assignments, have your checks and balances in place. I mean, because the problem with the internet is everybody's an expert, and that's an interesting problem. So. Thanks for spending some time with me today. If somebody wants to find your books or get a hold of you, how's the best way for them to do it?
The best way is on Amazon.com, or I have a website, calmiller.com.
Yep. And if you go to Cal's website, right on front, there's links to all his books, and you can just actually click on the book, and it will take you to the buy page on Amazon. So pick up one of Cal's books. They're well worth the read. I've read pretty well every one of them, and I would tell anybody, if you want a good read, read it. My wife Jill is big into crimes anyway, and I know she couldn't put the Russell Williams book down. I think I've told you that. She pulled it off the shelf one day, and I said, "What do you think of that?" And she said, "I'm 3/4 of the way through it in 2 days." So, if you want an interesting read, that's a good one. The History of Crime Stoppers is a good one. Choose any of them. Thanks for joining me, Cal, and have an amazing day. Thank you. Thank you for listening to the SDM Business Marketing WordPress podcast. The show is hosted by Robert Cairns, the CEO and Chief Creator of Amazing Ideas at StunningDigitalMarketing.com. This podcast comes out every week. It's available on all podcast platforms. If you'd like to be a guest on this podcast, please email us at podcast@StunningDigitalMarketing.com. If you'd like to find out more about the digital marketing services we provide, please go to StunningDigitalMarketing.com. This podcast is dedicated to Robert's late father, Bruce Cairns. Have an amazing week. Keep your feet on the ground and keep reaching for the stars. Make your business succeed.